Hi, everyone. Good morning. So it's a pleasure to be here. How many people were in the keynote yesterday? Okay. All right. So this is not the same topic. If in the end you have questions regarding yesterday's keynote, that's fine by me as well. If you have questions regarding anything else, that's fine by me as well. So AMA, ask me anything in the end. My name is Assaf, Luxembourg. This is called the Culture of Innovation. And I am super happy to be here, and I'm super grateful for Joe for making this happen. And here's what we're going to talk about in the next hour. Here's the plan. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about who I am, just so you get to know me a little bit. For those who were yesterday, not much change have changed since yesterday. So I'm the same me. We're going to talk a little bit about what is innovation, which is related to Chapter 10 that Joe mentioned. And I'll bring my perspective in there. It relates to your textbook. I'll talk about why is this important today. So yesterday we spoke about start with why. I want to start with why. So why is this an important issue? Why is it in your book? Why am I speaking about it here? So just put the context into that. And then I want to talk about clusters. I don't know if that's a term you heard, but some of you who are interested in the world of startups or entrepreneurship maybe came across the word ecosystem. Everybody talks about the ecosystem of startups here, the ecosystems of startup in Silicon Valley, in New York, in Tel Aviv, whatever. So I want to talk about the real academic term that is behind it, because this is an academic institution. So I'm going to talk about clusters, and then I'm going to wrap it up with my bottom line. Is this okay? Okay? I'm really happy you like this, because there's no alternative. That's what we're doing. So at least we're good with this. So real short about my story. And who I am. My name is Assaf Luxembourg. I am from Israel. I'm 34 years old. I'm an economist. And professionally speaking, what I'm really passionate about in life is not so much the economic side of me, but more another side, which I'm really passionate about, which is really to show people around the world the real face of my country. That's something I'm super passionate about. It's the YouTube videos I see at night. It's what I read online. It's related to what I do professionally. It's who I am in a way. So these are two things that are really key in my life, and I've built my professional life around them. I wasn't always super all into that. Up until the age of 22, there was a different me. Anybody here is a musician? Okay, what do you play? Piano? Sax? All right. Anybody here is dealing with sound or recordings or production? Okay, so let me show you. This was my room in high school. So I don't know if you can tell, but a little bit of history. This thing right here on the bottom right, that's a computer. So that's how personal computers looked like. They were heavy, big, white, with a big screen, not a flat one. This was my room in high school. I loved music. Until this day, I don't know how to play notes, but I taught myself sound design online. And back where I'm from, early 2000s, I was in high school. You all know, and some of you may like techno today. It's a very prevalent thing in America. Nobody knew in America, from my American friends, what techno is back in the early 2000s, but I grew up on that stuff. So when you liked bands, or your older brothers and sisters liked bands, we followed DJs or whatever. So this was me in high school. Back in those days, a lot of people in my country also thought, for some reason, that hip-hop in Hebrew is cool. So a lot of them wanted to be like local version of rappers, and I knew how to record, so I became their producer and DJ. So I was cool for a while with them when I was in high school. So that was me. But at the age of 22, which is in my country, you post your mandatory service, but before academic studies. So when you're at 18, you decide what you want to go study. For us, it's usually 21, 22. So when I was 22, I participated in a certain leadership summit that really brought me to understand that this is not who I am. That's like, I love this. Maybe I'm also good at it. But that's not going to be what I do at 35 or 45 or 55. And when I'll be 85, I don't want to say that this is what I did with my life. So that's how I understood that I'm more passionate about these things. They were always in my background. I never did something proactively with them. So I'm 22 years old, so I want to relate to a little bit of like your phase in life right now. I'm 22 years old. I need to decide what to study in the university, because it's kind of like the equivalent for being 18 here. And I want to do something with regards to my passion, meaning I want to represent my country overseas. And at the end of school, I want to get a job and obtain a profession that allows me to do this. So I was thinking, which people get paid to represent their countries overseas? Any ideas? Like literally, it's their job. They get paid to represent their countries. Say that out loud? Ambassadors, that's right. So it was clear to me that I'm going to be an ambassador. What should you study if you want to become an ambassador? Is biology relevant? Is physics relevant? What about political science? Right? Economics is very relevant because you need to understand how markets work if you want to be a good ambassador, because you're speaking with the business sector too. So I went to study political science and economics because I knew those majors, they have a mean towards an end. So I went and studied that in the local version of DC in Israel, which is in Jerusalem, so the big university in Jerusalem. I'm an economist by profession, which I wanted to be an ambassador. So I went to work for the right places all throughout my 20s that are relevant if you want to be an ambassador in my country. So local big nonprofits that are related to that field and that industry. I went to work for the government. I was an economist that worked with ambassadors, and my job was to tell ambassadors what to say with regards to the Israeli economy. So that's a great early career position if you want to be an ambassador later on, so they know who you are. Then I went to the private sector, because if you want to be a good ambassador, you need to understand business. So Assaf, go work with startups and entrepreneurs, and then go do biz dev, business development, and marketing, and strategy, and sales for big corporations like BDO to understand how they operate. So I was the man with the plan throughout my 20s. Here's another thing that happened. There's a famous book that came out in 2008 called Startup Nation, and it basically told the story of how Israel grew unexpectedly to become a big and powerful ecosystem for startups. And ever since that happened, and I was along my journey, I started getting a lot of requests to talk to a lot of incoming delegations that came to Israel to discover that startup nation. So I started getting requests. Assaf, can you come and meet our group of MBA students from the United States, from Harvard or Cornell or FSU or whatever? Can you meet our group of business people from China, investors from Europe, entrepreneurs from Latin America, all of those groups? Now, I wanted to be an ambassador. And a big part of the job is to represent your country, which is my passion. What do you think? Did I say yes or no? Of course, because if I get an opportunity to train on the job before I get the job, it's called OJT, on-job training, I get to acquire flight hours before I apply to flight school to become a pilot. That's going to give me substantial, unique added value. So of course I said yes, and I started doing a lot of that. Small in the beginning, then more and more and more. And this whole was supposed to be a mean towards an end. So I was the man with the plan throughout my 20s. And as you can understand from this long pitch that is supposed to bring to this punchline, today, at 34, I am not. So my plan succeeded. I invested I invested like an entire decade. Did it work? No. So at 30 years old, I had this big meltdown with my career. I understood I'm not going to be an ambassador. I'm not going to push towards that direction. Not when I'm married +1. It's not going to happen pragmatically. And I understood there are these moments in your life where you plan, the big boss laughs, and then you cry. And that was a big cry moment for me. The reason the big boss laughed is because this whole thing became my business. So that's how I started building my small consulting business. I never wanted to become an entrepreneur. My thing was to promote my country and become an ambassador, like going government. That's as far as you can get maybe from entrepreneurship. But I ended up building my business this way. So these are a lot of logos of organizations that I work with. I work with a lot of organizations in the startup industry. I work with a lot of schools in the US. I'm doing a lot of things. I do consulting. I do a lot of speaking engagements. I get to work as an ambassador for my country, but on my behalf, not on my country's behalf, which is cool. I can say what I want and what I believe, not what people like my boss or whatever tells me to say. So that's a little bit about what I do. I do a lot of other things, less relevant for today. I was a CEO for a startup for 2 years. That's not what I intended to do. I work with a lot of startups through accelerators and startup programs like Techstars, and this week is Startup Week here in Tallahassee, and that's a Techstars endeavor. I'm a part of Israeli startups like Silo, less relevant for now. That's a little bit about me and my journey. That's my other business, which we don't have time to talk about. I don't know if you know WeWork, but they have this thing, so I was one of the winners last year in Israel, yada, yada, okay, whatever. So in short, independent consultant speaker, that's what I do. I led a startup for 2 years as CEO, so I got to taste it from within. I do a lot of consulting, biz dev, and marketing for Israeli startups, so I still get to taste that from the industry side, aside of my ambassadorship work, which is all about my laser-focused passion in my professional life. And I learned about how to separate the what and how from the why. I took my real why, which is, you want to promote your country. And yes, I wanted to be an ambassador. But being an ambassador was a mean to an end. It was how to do it. And when I let that go, I understood I can build my career around that why, my real passion. So that's related to yesterday's keynote. If you missed that, I promise it's going to go live on my YouTube channel, maybe on FSU's channel or whatever, so you can all get that. Interesting, but not for today. What I want to do is get to the real stuff. So I want to talk about innovation. Why is it important? How it's all about clusters. That's the academic term, not ecosystems. And then get to the bottom line. So let's go. This is from your textbooks, chapter 10. And I was going through this, and then I saw this sentence right over there that talks about how economic models are not rich enough yet, maybe, to fully capture all aspects of entrepreneurship. And the question is, why? So I'm going to break the fourth wall, if you know that term, or I'm going to integral all of us and look at ourselves from above. What are we doing there? This is an economics class, right? We're studying economics. Let's remind ourselves what we're doing here. Economics is all about, it's part of social sciences, right? And social sciences, it's all about modeling human behavior and studying those models. Specifically with economics, we want to model things into curves, formulas. So when you learn supply and demand, you turn social stuff using statistics, which you also study, into some sort of a formula, into math, and then you're able to play with that math and project the future, study trends, look for the maximum point of the function, or whatever that is. So that's what we're doing here. So in economics, there's a very basic question. What really generates economic activity? Supply or demand? And it's a question of, your point of view, in a way, because it's social sciences. So what I'm going to do, I'm not going to deep dive into the economics. I'm going to leave that fun stuff to Joe and the rest of the professors here. I'm going to look at it from a more business perspective. So looking at it from the business world, marketing executives and the marketing approach traditionally would suggest you need to start by studying demand. You need to understand what consumers want and how supply can meet that demand. That's the traditional approach that has a lot of theory and practice into it, especially in the marketing world, market research and so on. Which brings me to the guy who's going to be the key reference here in this chapter. His name is Guy Kawasaki, and he has a famous TED Talk called The Art of Innovation, which you should all watch or read the book. So we talk about the culture of innovation. He talks about the art of innovation. So not the same perspective, but we use some of the things that he suggests. So he's a known high-tech speaker from Silicon Valley. Used to work with Steve Jobs. Interesting story. So he's the reference. So he says, and he claims, never ask consumers what they want. You should never focus on demand. And he's referring to his mentor and boss, Steve Jobs. And he says, if you ask consumers what they want, you run focus groups, you collect data, you do market research, consumers will always tell you that what they want is better, cheaper, faster, status quo. Because they don't know to tell you that they want the things that don't exist yet. And what you should really do when you want to do innovation, you need to think about how to jump to the next curve. Speaking of curves, don't try to look for a better point on the curve that you're in. Try to jump to the next curve. Innovation is about jumping curves. Interesting idea, and again, you can all check it out. So you need to start with supply. Now I'm coming back to the economics. You need to start with supply. We'll say people like Guy Kawasaki and others. What you need to do is figure out what do you believe, not just believe, but believe by studying and by really like believing in this, like looking at data and believing. What do you believe that consumers could, would, or should want? So I want to take you back to chapter 10. And there's this sentence over here that says that entrepreneurs discover previously unnoticed profit opportunities. And given what I just claimed, I would ask, do they discover or create new opportunities? And that's an open question. So I want to give you a few examples, still from your chapter. So the Google boys. Did the world really ask for another search engine in 1999? Because Joe can tell you, I don't know if you even knew what the internet was because you were like little, but we had Yahoo and Alta Vista and all these websites. We had a lot of search engines. There was an explosion of search engines. Today you only use one, really. Maybe in China they use others, but there's one search engine in the world today. And it was the most redundant thing, like that search engine, Google, was the most redundant search engine at the beginning because the world didn't ask for another search engine. Nobody told the market, consumers didn't tell the market, we want a new search engine that is not indexed, that is built on this long tail, on referrals and whatever, the whole Google model of how they're going to page rank websites, whatever. So the world didn't ask for a new search engine in 1998. Let's talk about Peter Thiel, and another name that should have been there, Joe, and Elon Musk. So did the world ask for more online payment solutions when PayPal started? Did they answer a demand, an existing demand? Not necessarily. Let's stick with Peter Thiel. This is without Elon Musk. He was one of the early investors in Facebook. So did the world ask for Facebook in 2005 or 2004? Not necessarily. And let's talk about Steve Jobs, if I already mentioned him. This is your best friend today. This is your gateway to the world. Did we ask Nokia to invent a smartphone in 2005? Is this really a smartphone, or is this a computer that calls? Think about it. So we didn't ask for smartphones in 2005 or 2006. Today, this is the obvious. It's our gateway to the world in a way. So this brings me to the definition of innovation, which is a blurb from a few sources that I want to use for today. That says the following thing. What is innovation? It's the introduction of something new. It's a new idea, method, or device. It's the production and adoption of better solutions to meet new requirements and needs. Note that it's new requirements and needs, new. It can be both a process or an outcome. Okay. Another important point I want to make before the next chapter. There's this mix today because of culture between entrepreneurship and innovation. Because when I shut your eyes and I tell you think about entrepreneurship, for many of you, you would think about startups, people with a t-shirt and a logo who take an office in a co-working space and develop an app. But entrepreneurship is not equal to innovation. Entrepreneurship is much bigger than innovation. So I want to make that distinction. Entrepreneurship is about any added value that you bring to the market. So here you can say we discover profit opportunities. If you're a cowboy 200 years ago and you move to the cowboy town and there's one street in town where all the people have saloons and you just open another saloon on the saloon street, that's not innovative. You can still add value. You can differentiate yourself in that market, obtain customers. That's entrepreneurship, 100%. But it's not necessarily innovative. So you discover unknown profit opportunities in that saloon market in that town, and you act on it. Innovation is about new and unique added value. Here, I would claim you create profit opportunities, or maybe even create new markets. They created a market. And I hold a Samsung device, and I'm talking about Apple. So that's a distinction. Entrepreneurship is much bigger. Here's another way to look at it. And again, this is also from Guy Kawasaki. You could claim that entrepreneurship is about unique and valuable. So you could draw a matrix where you put unique on one axis and valuable on the other axis. And you can understand what is a viable business versus an innovative business. So some of you are super sharp and you get an internship at McKinsey or you'll go work at BCG and you'll learn how to do a 2x2 matrix, which is what a lot of people in the consulting world do in order to analyze stuff. So let's use a 2x2 matrix. 4 areas here. So when you have something that is, I would say, not unique and not valuable, Guy Kawasaki calls that the bozo zone, because you created something that only you have but nobody wants. So you're not unique and you're not valuable. That's the bozo zone. When you create something that is unique but not valuable, maybe you want to teach the market. Maybe it will become valuable later. But right now, that's a hard business to do, right? When you're in this circle, you create something that is valuable. So now I moved from the non-valuable or valuable to the valuable. When you do something that is valuable but it's not unique, that could still be a viable business. You could open that 10th saloon in that cowboy town, and you could have a valuable business. But most likely, if you're not unique, you don't know how to differentiate yourself, you are doomed to compete on price. There's a lot of stuff that you buy, and you make the decision based on where is it cheaper. So it's called cost leadership. That's still a viable business. There are a lot of good businesses that are built on cost leadership, but it's not innovative. When you have something that is unique and valuable, you have what's called a golden goose. Then you have something that is really, truly innovative. So that's another way of looking at it to understand the difference between entrepreneurship and innovation. All of these 4 areas are entrepreneurial. If you want to be a bozo, that's still an entrepreneurial journey. If you build something that is super unique, that you believe in, but it's not valuable or not valuable yet, maybe you're going to fail the business, but it's still an entrepreneurial journey. The right side is, of course, entrepreneurial. That's also the valuable side, the viable business side, but only the upper part, unique and valuable, is innovative. Does this make sense up until now? Are you with me? Okay, great. So we understand a little bit about what is innovation. So I want to go to the why. Why is this important today? So I want to talk about times of change. That's something I did mention yesterday, so I'm going to look at it from a little bit of a different perspective. So I want you to look at these 2 photos. So you all learned about the Industrial Revolution in high school, and you all lived through the information revolution today. Here's an interesting cultural perspective to look at it. Our great-grandparents 200 years ago did not say, boy, we lived through the Industrial Revolution and the world is changing so rapidly and we need to adapt to change. They didn't think about it, they had to live through it. So they went from the small village to the big city. And instead of growing vegetables in the backyard, they had to go work in a factory. So what do you do with the kids? We need to invent this thing called school. And we get paid for our work. We don't sell what we grow. It's a different way. So the whole idea of, the value of your work, which you get paid for, and all of that stuff. So by the time they grew up and by the time they were mature, our great-grandparents, the world flipped 10 times. And they had to adjust. And for many, this opened new frontiers. Because suddenly, if you were in Europe, you could actually go on a steamboat and leave the peasant town where you were dirt poor in, and get on a steamboat, take the train, and then get on a steamboat, which was a new technology, and come to the new world, which is here. And then you could go west. And like those big stories of these big heroes, you could go west and look for what in California or Peru? Look for what? Gold. Because these stories about all these people who were dirt poor and went west and found gold and came back and bought a mansion. Here's an opportunity for social mobility. This could change my life and create a generational change in my family. Sounds familiar? Because it's exactly like startups today. The way to strike it and make it big. But it was available as a dream only because of technology. So technology advances fast. For them, it was steam, railroads, industrialized society, printing press, information. For us, it's everything that you see around you changing, which is really maybe phase one in the story of the internet. That's what we're living through so far. So technology advances fast, and there's a lot of disruption out there, which allows for a lot of opportunities. So it allows for new creations. And that's why innovation really matters in our day and age. Innovation existed in the 60s and 70s and 80s and in the 1930s or whatever. But in this day and age, it's an imperative thing to think about. And it changes corporations from within. It changes governments from within. Of course, it changes the marketplace, small, medium businesses, startups, the whole thing. It also changes culture. So I would guess that in 1995, it was not that cool to quit your Wall Street secured job after your MBA and go start your own company. You're delusional. In 2005, if you go corporate and you don't try your own startup, what, are you afraid? Why are you not trying? Or that's the admirable thing to do. So we have the current versions of cowboys. But that's culture. It will not last forever. So we need to understand that it's a phase of culture that this thing is admirable. It's because how technology changes our life, but technology will keep changing our life. So we need to remember that. But that's why innovation really, really matters. And the change that it does, not only for startups, but for corporations across any sector, for governments, it's only the beginning. So that's why it's super important today to understand what innovation is, to understand the opportunities once you understand what it is, and from an economics perspective, to learn how to study it. So we could put it on a curve and try to project where it's going and understand how to play with it. So that's this chapter. And this brings me to this chapter, which is all about clusters. And the term that the industry, especially in tech land, the term that has really been thrown around is the word ecosystem, which came from biology or ecology. And people talk about the startup ecosystem and how the ecosystem is important for local businesses to thrive, especially with technology. And people talk about, Silicon Valley, how it works over there, and other places around the world. So if innovation is all about creation, well, you need a certain freedom of thought to do it. You can't create when there's no freedom of thought. And in order to have freedom of thought, you need a supportive environment. So that's the idea behind what is an ecosystem. It's that supportive environment that allows you to take a risk and try or think outside the box and all these things. Just like academic institutions in their core being are. These are places where you should think outside the box. I work with many academic institutions. Not all of them are like that. Some of them maybe forgot their purpose. This one doesn't seem like one of those. But there are, in the core, the idea is we don't want to educate you. We want to give you the tools to think for yourself and go try and prove us that we're wrong with our theories. We want to be proven wrong. That's how science works. That's a lot of freedom of thought. And that's why that ecosystem is important in the academic world and in other industries. So there is an academic term for ecosystems which is not from ecology or biology. And that word is clusters. So we're done with Guy Kawasaki, but the next person I want to bring is this guy, which you probably don't recognize because many times we don't see the faces of the the people that we refer to in academics. But this guy's name is Michael Porter. Anybody ever heard of Michael Porter? He's a very known business thought leader, researcher. He came with the study of competitiveness, the 5 forces of Michael Porter. Some of them probably will have this in a certain business class or something like that. So he's a leading authority on company strategy. Made his career in Harvard, but today he's I think he's all over the place. He wrote The Competitive Advantage of Nations in 1990. That's not the famous 5 forces of Michael Porter, which many of you will probably encounter later on, or in your MBA or whatever. That's another thing that he wrote in 1990. Note it's 1990. It's after half of the world melted. The USSR is gone. There's a new world out there. So he wrote that then. Another person I want to bring up is this guy. He is really from our field. His name is Paul Krugman. Anybody heard of Paul Krugman, or at least heard the name once? Maybe you did. So he's from Princeton originally. He's a world-known economist. Some people like him, some people less, but he's world-known. Won a Nobel Prize in economics. He wrote Geography and Trade in 1991, so same years. The reason I'm saying those years, this is not our days and age, startup world, culture. It's before that. It's when technology only starts to revolutionize our lives. So, what is a cluster according to them, if I mesh up the definitions and mix them up? A cluster is a geographical location where enough resources and competences amass and reach a critical threshold, giving that geographical location a key position in any given industry, branch, or activity, any given economic branch or activity, and with a decisive, sustainable competitive advantage over other places, maybe even a world supremacy in that field. Let's think of clusters you all know. Who wants to give me an example? So who wants to guess what is the world's most famous, undisputable, cluster? Think outside the box. What industry is located in a geographical location having all of these things all the way to world supremacy in that field? Yes. Silicon Valley, I'll get to that. Think more creatively, because Silicon Valley is the obvious. We'll talk about that in a minute. Beyond business and tech. You all grew up and, on that cluster. It influenced your life, influenced your education, mine too, everybody's. Yeah. Hollywood, thank you. Hollywood is exactly that. So we're going over here. Because when you look at it, it answers all of these criteria. What is your name? Bryce. Bryce, you're right. So for that dream of me as a screenwriter to literally hide behind the bush, across that cafe, because I know Steven Spielberg has that meeting over there. And I'm going to chase him and tell him, Mr. Spielberg, please read my script. And if he's really, really nice that day, he'll not push me and tell me, go away, creep. He'll take those papers and throw them away to his, car. And maybe there's a 1 in a billion chance that he'll actually read some of it later, and he'll call me and say, listen, this is gold, and I'll become the new, Cinderella screenwriter. Or that actress that came from a small town and moved to Hollywood to try to make it big. For that to happen, you need a geographical location with all of these things. It can't be scattered around. Even if it's online, it needs to have a certain geographic location in terms of an online geographic location. You must have, it's just like matter. It attracts itself and it collides and gain mass by that. Same thing, same physics. So that's the world's most known ecosystem, I would claim, and many others will claim. Let's go to the other side of the United States, the other side of the nation. Which city is this? New York. What's the big ecosystem over there, the big cluster? Who said Wall Street? Thank you. What's your name? James. You're right. Wall Street is a cluster. You may like it. You may not like it. It's geographically condensed, that's for sure. It's a cluster. And of course, early 21st century or late 20th century, this cluster grows up. As you said, Silicon Valley. Right? Who said Silicon Valley first? Yeah, you did. So Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley has all of these components, of course. So I want to take you to another example that will drive me to my punchline of this chapter. If you go over there to the other side of the earth, which is literally in between LA and Silicon Valley, just on the other side of the planet, there's another place that grew as such ecosystem. So I want to give you just a little bit of reference from the place that I'm from. And I'm going to use that reference, not because I'm trying to sell you Israel here, but because I will use that as a reference to get me to my punchline. And it's all in this book that came out. It's an old book already. It came out, what, like 10 years ago? Startup Nation. So Israel grew into such cluster. But if Silicon Valley is all about tech, Israel is specifically about startups, not necessarily big corporate tech. So it's even more niche and concentrated. So it's all in this book, because I'm not going to go long. But for many of you would say, Israel? So for Israel, it also comes with a wide gap between what people have as first impression and what's really going on in the cluster, specifically with startups. So when you ask most people what do they think about Israel, for many of them they would say, Israel, the Holy Land. Some of them would say, yeah, it's a Jewish state, so these black-wearing ninja Jewish Buddhist Amish monks. I saw one when I was in Brooklyn a few months ago. Yeah, it's over there. And it's in the desert, and they have this conflict. So it doesn't seem to me like a place to go and do business, or a place where a business cluster would grow up in. And also, if you look at where Israel is, like the small dot, which is, apparently it's in the big loving and embracing circle with a lot of fun stuff happening around, it doesn't give you the impression of startups, right? So where I come from, what's actually going on is very, very extremely polarized, like the other side of, what a lot of people think. So Israel is a small country also. Basically, you want to understand Israel is an economy. You're all going to study macroeconomics. So Israel economically is an island. It's a small and open market, which is equivalent to the size of New Jersey. If you want to understand Israel, take New Jersey. Anybody here is from New Jersey originally? Okay, I'm sorry for this example. I have a lot of friends in New Jersey, but it's just because of the size. So take New Jersey, bear with me, strip it off continental America, like literally strip it off, put it in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, but not like a state like Hawaii. Make it a sovereign country. Okay, so you with your 8 million fellow New Jerseyans as citizens with your own government and whatever, now you need to run an economy where everything is far away. You're an island, and you're remote from the markets. You have to think global, right? You have to be an open market. You have to be based on trade. You have to add value, because nobody's going to come to a small island as a market opportunity. Make sense? That's Israel economically. Israel is not an island, but because of politics, literally Israel is an island. Cars leave Israel only on a boat. You're not from Europe, so leave that. So there's an extreme gap between first impressions and what's really going on. So I'm going to run through this quickly. Israel did grow that ecosystem against all odds. Just to understand how that works, I meet a lot of business people who come to Israel, especially from East Asia. They don't have any first impressions because their media is different, whatever. They only know this kind of Israel. For them, this is Israel. Just to give you an example, so this is a cool map that shows how condensed the industry is in terms of startups. You ask, Deloitte asked venture capitalists, where do they feel confident investing in? So US came first, Israel came second. Confidence, like where do you feel safe investing? Safe and Israel are not two words that usually go together emotionally. So, that's a very interesting result. All of these companies do not, hire a lot of engineers and people in Israel because they support Israel politically. They support business. They support profit. So they do a lot of stuff in Israel, mainly R&D. Israel is like the lab for a lot of corporations. So it draws a lot of capital. It produces a lot of jobs for many people. And a lot of other governments, especially after 2008 with the crisis, wanted to draw the lessons from how did we pull it off against the laws, against our plan. Like we didn't plan for this, but how can we copy the right parts for us? Because in 2008, we want to attract capital and produce jobs in Madrid, Berlin, Munich, London, other places, and so on and so forth. So Tel Aviv is very known as a tech cluster. There is an economic academic study that actually does those rankings. It's called the Startup Genome. It's usually, or at least it was initially promoted by TechCrunch, which is like the leading tech-related media outlet, or at least a very respected one. So it's called the Startup Genome, and they wanted to map ecosystems or clusters in the field of tech, aka what are the best places in the world for you to start your startup. So of course Silicon Valley came first in 2012. Tel Aviv, not a lot of people would put Tel Aviv second. They still do those rankings. We also kind of fell to number 5 and then number 6, but still for a country like Israel it's incredible to be in those charts, and this is a great research and the way it's being done, and it's a great study about the competitiveness of clusters in a field. Because today that field is much more competitive. It's not like Hollywood is still Hollywood and other places are like, in tech it's really shrinking down those gaps. All right? So the Startup Genome. So innovation is not just about startups. I would claim it's something much deeper. I'll give you an example. My country, and not a lot of people know that because a lot of people refer to religion and history and politics, but in terms of economic politics, my country up until the mid-'80s, if you take that chart where you put the red star, that's socialism and communism on the left, and you take Dear Lady Liberty and put it on the right, if I ask you today where would you put Israel, where would you place Israel on this chart? Given your first impressions, I'm not expecting a very thorough answer here. Left or right? Right. So you put Israel. Israel is America's best friend, in that region and the whole thing. So of course it's going to be right, which it is today. But not too many people know that before we were this way, we were all the way over there. We were never a communist country. We were never USSR. But we're a country that grew up with a very deep socialist, even communist roots. The interesting thing, here's an example for that. There's this thing in Israel called the kibbutz, which is a very interesting model. Now, all these people that came with socialist and communist theories, 19th century and early 20th century, they had the same theories like East Europe, West Europe, and the US. There was a time that people our age believed that communism is going to fix the human condition. They believe that it's the future. Like, that was it. And a lot of people, that's how they built Israel. But they built this thing called the kibbutz, which you couldn't find in the USSR or China. This was not in the textbooks. Funnily enough, the USSR is not around today. The kibbutz did survive. So that model that was able to adapt was very innovative. It was unique and valuable for Israel, going back to the definition, so it was able to adapt and survive and thrive over time. So here's another way of looking at it, even from a deeper perspective. Israel is a country, put all the other parts aside, it's a country that it's a very young country, 70 years old, thousands of years of history and legacy and heritage, but is a modern independent country since 1948. And it's a country that moved like that to the other side. There are other countries in the world that are pretty young and were on that side and wanted to move to that side. For many of them, doing a small shift came with 2 civil wars and a lot of depression, economic depression, and a lot of stuff. And Israel did that like that. So there's a lot of innovative DNA for how things are ran. It's not just startups. So I gave you the example of the kibbutz and how we're a country that, for many, many reasons, which I'll not discuss right now, was able to shift from left to right without tearing up society in the middle. I have a lot of friends in America. I remember when Obamacare was like the most discussed issue. I had friends on all sides. So, talking about Obamacare was about who we are. Here's a country that moved from one side to the other, didn't change who we are. The ability to do that is related to innovation. So what is the secret? And I want to use that case study to get to the punchline. I believe the secret is all about culture. Growing ecosystems or clusters of excellence is all about culture. Hollywood needs a certain culture. Wall Street needs a certain culture. You may want to change that, improve that, or you like it the way it is. But you need a certain culture that is good for that swamp, that ecosystem, that ecological environment, that cluster of excellence. Same for Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley has a culture, has a religion, you could say. There's a belief that we can fix the human condition through technology. Not all people would agree with that. That technology is the answer and the only answer. But it's prevalent in Silicon Valley. Where I come from, there's also a certain culture. So the place that I come from has a certain culture that is very, very informal, like you guys have here, but is also very, very in-your-face, New York style, impolite, and a certain culture. So where I come from, there's a lot of informality. People usually don't dress up like this when you go to important business meetings. Where I come from, people tend to be very direct. People tend to be also very warm. So if you come from, a big, places in Europe, you feel this warmness, and it'll make you feel awkward. Like, why? Like, I don't know you. Why do you talk to me like we're best friends or whatever? A very energetic and high-paced society. You can see it in the way we drive. Anybody here that was in Rome and tried driving in Rome? We're so much worse than Rome, but never mind. We don't know how to stand in line. So, there's a certain culture that exists in Israel, let's put it this way. There's this word called chutzpah, which is used a lot in the book that he mentioned, called Startup Nation, and that I mentioned. So it's a certain culture. Now that culture has good parts and bad parts. If you try to run a corporate, an empire with such a culture, that's not good. For America, this could not work at scale. But if you want to run things small, that's a good culture. Startups are small. Israel is small. If you're an entrepreneur and your plan is to be formal, polite, stand in line, wait till your turn, get a no and say thank you and walk away and not try to break through the wall, you're not going to make it. So there are some derived advantages for such culture. That's why I believe culture is important. So again, this is not always good, but that's the DNA of the culture where I'm from. It is good for startups. That's why Israel is known as Startup Nation and not necessarily Tech Nation. Tech Nation is Silicon Valley. So if you ask me, as an economist or a sociologist who does a lot of, that's kind of like my field, exploring and extracting the secret added values of the place that I'm from. What connects all of these pieces that takes the extreme secular version of the kibbutz together with the extreme religious part of Jerusalem, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, that? It's a place in the middle of nowhere, but it's not the only place in the middle of nowhere that doesn't have any natural resources. A lot of people talk about the Israeli army. The Israeli army doesn't have a single technology that the US Army doesn't have. So it's not about the technology you have, it's how you play with it. What allowed Israel to grow this in the least likely of places? And since I claim it's culture, I want to give you something that could be used as a reference maybe for you to think about later. I would claim, and many others would claim, that the DNA of that culture is called creative energy. Sounds like a marketing language cliche, so I want to explain what that is. Israel is a place of clashing extremes. That's the place that I'm from. That's where we can build our cluster of excellence from. It's who we are. Israel clashes extremes all the time. It has always been a place where East clashes with the West, historically. It's a place where religions clash. It's a clash between old and new, old heritage and cultures, new and modern country. It's a clash between left and right in terms of politics, big time. We were socialists, today we're super liberal. Some would say we've gone too far, big debate, but never mind. So left and right. It's a clash between Jewish and Muslim, Israeli and Arab, well, however you want to play with it. So, clashing extremes. Now, if you think physics, you take two extremes, like two electrons that repel each other, and you go to Fermilab or CERN in Switzerland, and you speed them up to the speed of light. And then you smash them together. What is being released? What is being released from that collision? A lot of energy. Now, we all know that if you don't manage that energy correctly, what will happen? Big kaboom, right? Or black hole. Not fun. It's a lot of energy. But if you do manage that energy, which thank God they do in Fermilab and CERN, energy has to be preserved in physics. It can't disappear. It has to go somewhere. So it goes to creation. It creates new particles. You discover the Higgs boson. You find hidden parts of reality in nature, in the universe, or whatever. Now, we are a place that clashes extremes all the time. For some reason, as a political scientist, against all odds, we didn't have 5 civil wars. Because in social sciences, when you model Israel, according to the formula, we should have had like 5 civil wars. We should have been a failed state long ago. So what is it that makes the energy go somewhere else to creation, startups, innovation, outside-of-the-box thinking, all those things that people say about us? It's all because of culture. It's not the geopolitical situation. It's not anything like that. You put Israel in Cuba, we'll have the same culture in Cuba. You put it in Siberia, it's the same DNA in Siberia. It's internal, it's who you are. That's what you start with. So clashing extreme is a part of it. Also, Israel is a place where you're grown to think and feel like you're part of something that is bigger than yourself. So there's that. All of these things, they inflict on the culture. But they're not unique to Israel. Every place has its own culture. Every place could nurture a joint sense of purpose. In Israel, we have it big time. Israel is not an individual country. It's a very liberal country. It's a modern country. It's a democratic country. But it's not an individual country. Like, our big thing is not, we have a system for you to pursue your own individual happiness. There's something bigger that you're a part of, whether you like it or not. That's the culture. But it drives a sense of purpose. It allows people to take risks and try to, afford to fail. It's not just about me. So every place could grow a cluster. Every place could be unique if you really understand and hack and study and research the DNA of your culture, which is not economically, it's not mathematically in the field of economics, but it's important because economics is about people in the end, it's social sciences. But it's not enough to be unique, you also have to be valuable. And Israel was lucky, against all odds, against planning, to take that in the right time where the information age hit. And when startups are so important because they change a lot of the world around us. So this is an example of how places could grow a cluster of excellence or an ecosystem around an industry. Doesn't have to be tech, doesn't have to be finance, could be arts, could be a lot of things. Not always you need world supremacy, you could have regional supremacy. There are a lot of examples for that in Europe, in the US, like Austin, Texas, and others. So there are a lot of examples for that. So here's the bottom line, and I want to wrap up and leave room for questions because I want to be on time, because I promised Joe. It all comes to know thyself. And that's related to my keynote yesterday, because I would claim all of this is also true for the individual level, for us as human beings or business units, if you were yesterday. If you know who you are, you know your own individual culture. We're individuals, so I don't have a culture with myself. It's just my personality. So if I know that, it helps me find my personal why. What is the big thing for me? Why am I doing what I'm doing? Why am I even, trying to do the things that I do? And once you find out why, that answers also a deep question of who I am in this world and who do I want to be in this world. That why, since it's part of who I am, it doesn't change very often. It doesn't change at all, usually. But then, it allows me to change the what and the how. So if you know why you're studying, if you know why you want to work in the field that you want to work with, if you know why you want to have the career you want to have, it allows you to change the what and the how. It allows you to say, okay, I may want to be an ambassador, but being an ambassador is not my why, it's a how. So when that doesn't work, you can adjust like entrepreneurs and reinvent yourself, which is all about innovation. So that what and how could change. And that's where creation comes from. That's where innovation comes from, because that why has a certain calling. I felt that in my personal journey. My country has a certain why about who we are. It's not related if we're left or right. We could be left and then right. It doesn't change us who we are. So there's a certain calling. And then you understand you're not alone, because then you find other people that have the same why. They have different whats, different hows, but same core why. So you find out that you build a community around you. Even from a business perspective, not literally, your neighborhood. And that allows you to build a certain ecosystem or a cluster of excellence. So there's a known term that a venture capitalist in Israel once shared with me that is true for Israel for sure. I think it's true for any cluster, true for Silicon Valley, it's true for Hollywood, it's even true for Wall Street in some cases. Because Wall Street does have a little bit of a different culture. But the term is coopetition. Coopetition is a mix between cooperation and competition. And the idea is, I want to be better than my competitor, but I don't want to kill my competitor. What I really want to do is grow the pie for both me and my competitor. I always want to punch them in the face and be better than them and win the market, but I don't want them to die. I want them to grow 10x and for me to grow 15x. So we cooperate with our competition because we're in the same cluster. And that, I believe, is the core of the culture of innovation. Thank you.